My name is Lakshmi Devi, and I'm the Dean for Academic Development and Enrichment at Sinai. Welcome. There's a 9th Annual Faculty Development Symposium, and the office itself consists of myself, the Dean, and Dr. Elizabeth Howell, the Associate Dean for Academic Development, and Rama Chitale, who is out there handing out the packets, who's single-handedly actually put this particular event together. A big thank you to her. So our office, it provides guidance and resources to help faculty in their career advancement by enhancing mentoring, collaboration, and leadership opportunities. Basically, it is the 3 pillars of our office. We put together events for enhancing mentoring. We also collaborate with CTSA for the Leadership Development Program, and we have other activities where we get different groups of people together to enhance collaborations. One of them is actually the Faculty Idea Prize that we advertise. Hopefully you've seen them. If not, see them next year. It is a competition for 2 junior faculty to come together on projects that they haven't worked on and pitch the project in 2 pages that gets reviewed, and the winner gets picked, and there is a the $10,000 prize on it that the 2 faculty share, and most of these prizes actually have been very collaborative ideas that have become either startup companies or they have actually become NIH grant applications. So it's a good incentive. So today's event is Navigating Work, Life, and Mentorship in Academic Medicine, and we in addition to the presentations that we have today, we are handed down to you the folders which have some of the materials that previous attendees of this event have requested, which is previous times we had this symposium focusing on getting promoted at Sinai, and they wanted to know the required CV format. Sinai has a particular format that your CV has been to get to evaluate for promotion. And the reason for this CV is it makes it easier for the committee members to evaluate each person because it is all in the same format. So take time to look at the format. Keep the CVs updated. Don't wait until the time you're ready to ask your chair to get promoted. Everything that needs to go on the CV, please do it right away. The other question that we have asked is comparison requirement across faculty tracks. You know that we have investigator track, clinician educator track, clinician the investigator track, research track, clinician educator track, and practice track. And what do these different tracks mean? You need to know because the requirements and the information needed to get promoted for each of the tracks are different. So you need to. So there is a metrics in there that please consult. And also we assemble all the resources that are for you to use. And information about the resources are provided. The contact info is there for whatever resource you might need. And as well as past events that have held and upcoming events that are coming your way. Keep your eyes open. One of the events that those of you who are interested in doing research, grants, applying for research grants, we are having a 2-day event by Beth Schachter, who's going to be talking about the R01, the R grant workshops. She also will do at some point the K series of workshop for the career awards. But this is going to be November 14th and 28th. You have to registration is required because the space might be limiting. So if you are interested, do please register by clicking that button. The other thing, those of you who might be a little bit senior in your careers who might be interested in participating in this LEAD Academy, we have been partnering with the CTSA for the LEAD Academy Leadership in Emerging Academic Departments, the LEAD program with that Janice Gavrilov runs. This is the 3rd year. The application has been sent out. You might have received it. Hopefully you didn't put it in the trash. Hopefully you'll open it. If you're interested in participating in it, please do apply. The requirements are there, eligibility requirements are there. And the other thing that I request for you to do is to fill out the post-event survey for this event. And these forms are the ones that guide us towards what we have to do in the future. So it is really up to you to tell us what kinds of events you would like us to put together, and we will make put our efforts into trying to make that happen. One last thing that I have here, those of you who are clinicians, let us know if we have this event as a CME credit, offer CME credits. Would that be enticing you and or your friends to attend, your colleagues to attend, to fill up this room? So the other thing that so one thing that I don't want to advertise already, because I know that you're all busy people taking time, difficulty taking time off. So 2019 is the 10th annual Faculty Development Symposium. It's going to be held sometime towards the beginning of November. We will keep you posted with the save the date. What we're planning to do is to have an all-day symposium partnering with the Office of Wellbeing Resilience. You'll hear about it in a bit, as well as with the new Office for Gender Equity that's going to be coming your way. But nonetheless, what we want to do is to have sessions during the day based on skills and career development in academic medicine that you are going to tell us. So please do recommend your ideas for speakers, sessions, and workshops in that the evaluation form that we have handed out to you. One of the other things that we have been doing, because we have learned that everybody is busy, especially clinicians and clinician educators, so we have been generating podcasts. This is the podcast that came out recently.
Dr. Juan Wisniewski and Dr. Jenny Lin, both from the Department of Medicine, have been mentor and mentee for a decade. In the conversation you're about to hear, they talk about their mentoring relationship and offer tips for you on how to connect with mentors of your own. The other voice you'll hear is Rama Chitale from the Office of Academic Development and Enrichment.
So, that podcast link is on our website. If you're interested in hearing about it, it's only 10 minutes. I make sure that it doesn't go more than 10 minutes, so I hope you'll have time to listen to it. And then you can learn about the kinds of things that you can recommend that we do as a podcast or as a workshop or as a presentation. So coming back to today's today's event, brought back by your request, navigating work and life as well as mentorship in academic medicine. So what we're going to do is to have a short presentation by Dr. McGee, followed by a short presentation by Dr. Bernstein, and then that's going to be followed by a discussion session, a panel discussion session, Q&A, where you get to ask these two speakers questions moderated by Dr. Elizabeth Howe. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Dr. McGee. Dr. McGee is currently the Associate Dean for Faculty Recruitment and Professional Development at Northwestern University, Feinberg School of Medicine. In his role, Dr. McGee's primary responsibility is to support the development of independent research programs for early career faculty. His career path to creating this unique career began over 20 years ago with laboratory research in basic neuroscience and cellular pharmacology. His current roles then evolved to designing and leading research training at multiple levels, during which he began developing novel coaching models to complement research mentoring. A strong theme throughout his career has been in diversity efforts related to both gender and racial ethnic equality. Today, in addition to the professional developmental role, Dr. McGee leads a team of social science, scientists, and education researchers in the NIH-funded National Longitudinal Study of Your Life Scientists. He's also embarked on a novel career coaching experiment. It's called the Academy for Future Science Faculty. So, as you see, he has been deeply involved with new approaches to promoting effective mentoring in relationships and grant writing skills. And through actually a national program, which is how I met Dr. McGee, National Research Mentoring Network. So please join me in welcoming Dr. McGee.
So thanks very much, Lakshmi, and everyone for inviting me. Looking forward to this. I had a great day already talking with many of your colleagues. So what I wanted to do today is kind of I know that the people in the audience are very diverse in terms of where you're coming to from this and where you're coming in. So rather than having one theme, what I want to do is introduce a bunch of snippets from the standpoint of, I'm calling it Beyond Mentoring 101, which is making it work and complementary approaches. So hopefully some of these will land with each of you as we go along and kind of stimulate discussion, because the whole goal in my 20 minutes is really to essentially, I know you have a lot going on here. People are, really getting into this, but want to introduce a few variations and some practical things, but also push the envelope a little bit about where things are kind of going in some of the crazy things I get mixed up in, which is really I get bored easily, so I keep looking for different crazy things to do. So these are a kind of a summary of the topics I'm going to touch on briefly. So we'll be moving quickly, a couple minutes for each one of them. And things like, and some of them will make no sense to you, but that's why I want to decode them as I go through. But it's actually bits and pieces. Some of them will building on things that you've envisioned before, and then ending with kind of a brief kind of something that's coming along like actually the science of effective mentoring in STEM. I want to introduce you to that, where that's coming in the future. So the Mentoring 101 I'm calling is the Entering Mentoring Framework. I know a number of you are probably familiar with that, which in my mind was really a pivotal event. Back when that was created through Howard Hughes Medical Institute, through Joe Handelsman and colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, to me that was really the pivotal event in beginning to look at systematic mentoring skills development. And then in 2015, they actually published a new version, which has now become the basis, and that's why I become involved with them in terms of testing this, particularly in the CTSA model. And now, in the last 5 years, been a really dramatic expansion of activities along something now called CIMMER, which is the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences Research, and then the National Research Mentoring Network. So all these have kind of come together. If you haven't seen it, that's kind of the brainchild of the folks at University of Wisconsin in terms of the idea this is their current version. And some of you I know have gone through training for this, and actually it's a skills-based model developed initially for graduate students and postdocs who are mentoring undergraduate research assistants during the summer. So that was the whole starting point, recognizing they had no clue what they were doing, like most of us don't know what we're doing when we get into this mentoring process. We just kind of do it. So through them, they've really identified what I refer to as the core attributes of highly effective mentoring relationships. It's not being a good mentor and being a bad mentor. It's looking at these as relationships and defining the elements by which they become effective or can become ineffective. And in the training, these are all based on a workshop model of knowing these, learning what they are, and beginning to develop them as skills. We argue that these are all learnable and teachable skills. So rather than thinking about, well, some people are born good mentors, no, mentoring is a highly developed skill that you think about and you refine it and you continue to get better with it as you go. So this is what I'd say, what I would call the backdrop. If you're interested in the kind of the starting point, this is what to me is kind of the state of the industry. There are a lot of other approaches out there. This is one I'm most familiar with and I think has kind of gained the most traction that I'm aware of. But now, how do you move this in terms of all of the work that typically is done? It's about the mentors. How do you help people become better mentors? We're moving away from that. We're moving back from the standpoint of, well, it's all up to the mentor, to no, it's really not. It's really about shared responsibility. So we're actually moving away from the classical emphasis on mentoring skills as the only thing that matters. So one of the terms that we've created, and with several of is the concept of mentoring up. So it actually comes out of the business industry, the business model of what's called managing up. And from our perspective, mentoring up is how do you develop the skills of mentees to effectively manage their mentoring relationships. So move it into as something, it's a mentee's responsibility as much as a mentor. So fundamentally, what we're doing is teaching these core skills of mentoring skills to graduate students and postdocs. And as we teach it, the same curriculum basically with planning is, think of yourself as schizophrenic. You're bipolar for the next couple of hours, where you're thinking about it, if I'm going to be a mentor, how do I make it work? But now, how am I going to manage my own mentoring relationships with those people who are my mentors? How do I assign those same principles? So now I don't have to necessarily worry, I hope my mentor gets it right. I hope my mentor thinks about it. No, it's your life. How do you actually develop and lead those relationships? So these become some of the core elements that move into it from the standpoint of having those skills from at the early stages of during research training in particular, but same thing can apply to clinical training. How do you actually engage and enable? Yeah, and so we do this actually with one of the programs I lead at Northwestern for graduate programs, and the graduate programs say, please, we'd love to have graduate students can take more responsible for the relationship. So we've not found no resistance to this whatsoever. Standpoint, of course, we want our students to have that kind of a skill. So that's the element, but then you can take it one step further and really begin to think of mentoring relationships as consciously co-created relationships. So how do you go into it knowing we're both going to be involved in setting this up and make it work? So for those of you who are involved in graduate training, PhD training, the IDP has become a coin of the realm. And it's around development and has been somewhat effective, but a lot of people, okay, I've filled it out, I've checked the box, okay, quit bothering me, as opposed to turning it into a real tool. But the idea of having a plan, you'll see as we go further, actually is something that we're actually encouraging and focusing on more all the time. Seems logical. What if it started? What if a mentoring relationship started with, hi, tell me what you're looking for from me as a mentor? So initially, right from the very beginning, it's focused on what is it you're looking for from me. And the reason that is important is because it begins to break it down into pieces. Well, the most difficult thing we find in the mentoring world is saying, go find a mentor. So how many of you received an email from somebody, gee, will you be my mentor? And what's your first response? I don't have time. Now, what do you want? Okay? I mean, that's the fundamental sequence of responses when you see something like that come in. First is, I see that you've published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I think I have something I want to propose to them. I wonder if I could get 15 to 20 minutes of your time just to talk through how do you actually create and write a paper to New England Journal of Medicine. Who's going to say no to that? That's mentoring. But it's making mentoring down into small bits that you can actually see it and figure out what it's actually about. So this is the idea of taking the responsibility for yourself and helping to break it down into small bits. But I think it's important to really actually bring out the fact that research mentoring and other academic mentoring are really two different beasts. And that's why even a lot of the mentoring literature has been built around research mentoring, which is this intensive relationship. It's the way we help scientists become who they are, but it also often conflates training and development and research productivity. So it's got some real challenges that have to be navigated in many different ways. It also has incredible professional leverage, which we don't like to talk about sometimes. But basically, your mentors make or break your future. So you're not going to challenge them if you have a fear that it's going to affect how they think and do. So we have to deal with that in the research setting. Also deals with this incredibly unpredictable aspect of creating new knowledge. We all go into this, and what happens if it doesn't work? Which half the time research, half if we're lucky, doesn't work. So it's got all this ambiguity built into it. But in clinical and teaching setting, again, it has its own separations of very unique attributes. So even as you begin to think about consciously separating these as really two quite different beasts, they've got the same core elements of design, but you have to think about what are you actually trying to get to at the end of the day. What we have found in some of our work, and I would say, is what really matters in these things, actually chairs are incredibly important in terms of how they set the culture of departments. We can talk about that later if you want. A really fascinating study we did, a qualitative study of microclimates in different science departments. But also we're really breaking it down to mentoring for and in what. So this idea of breaking it down to very discrete pieces of what it is you're looking for from individuals all of a sudden moves it into a manageable, essentially interaction, as opposed to something that's hard to define. And this is, I think, and historically has been one of the problems that people have been, like, well, what do you want from me, and kind of thing. So we really are looking at breaking it down into structural pieces. So how do you move, though, from random bits to a plan? Okay, so I talked a minute ago, and those of you, and here is some concept of an individual development plan, which is what now even NIH-funded graduate students or postdocs are required to have an IDP. But the classical IDP has focused on, well, what do you want to develop? Okay, all right, sounds good, makes sense. And we talk in the training of mentoring is coming up with a mentoring plan. Sounds good. Kind of not quite sure what that means, but we've moved at the faculty level into something quite different. We really call it a career advancement plan. So we are really moving, particularly at a faculty level, away from a developmental into this is what I want to become. Now, how do I get a pathway to get there? So starting from where you want to become in your particular setting gives you the advantage of saying, okay, if that's what you want now, how do we break this down? So this career advancement plan is we typically look at a 1 and 3 year kind of a time frame. And this actually structured model has become the core of any of our institutional K awards at Northwestern. So this becomes, and literally we have it, okay, you start in year 1, you fill it out in black ink. Black ink, right. Does anybody actually have ink? I guess if you print it out. So a year later, we come in back and look at it, and then you fill it out in red. So people can say, okay, here's what I said I was going to do. Here's where I've gotten to. I haven't gotten here. So now your advising team say, why not? Well, I couldn't get the biostatistician to respond to me. I didn't want to bother her. No, that's not the way this system works. Okay, how do we get you past this roadblock that you've got into your movement? So it really becomes a nice structured document, but it's about an advancement plan. It's starting from where you want to get to, and so the logic is really different from just a pure development plan. Again, how you implement this idea of mentoring as being something effective for the process. All right, change of gears. Okay, Sherbert, clear the palate for a minute. One of the things that we've been really interested in the National Research Mentoring Network is how do you move the idea of culture and the culture we bring with us into mentoring relationships, and the degree to which cultural and identity differences can really complicate relationships, but we really don't talk about them very much. So in the classic entering mentoring curriculum, there is one kind of an hour and a half that kind of gets into this in a little different way. But 8 of us through the National Research Mentoring Network took off on an adventure. We spent 18 months saying, okay, if we want to engage conversations about difference and conversations about how you navigate these in mentoring relationships, what would it look like? And so we came up with, actually, it's a day-long, advance. It's like, so it's beyond 101. Here are the basics. Now, let's say if we really want to move in to become highly skilled and knowledgeable in cultural relationships. And so we've been testing it. We actually have a publication that describes the process. And I, again, obviously would love to talk more. Any one of these things I can talk for hours on, you could probably guess. But I want to just get the snippets out there. But it's what's happening is I'm seeing conversation engaged at the faculty level I have never seen before. Literally conversations about who I am, what's important to me, and how this moves into mentoring relationships. And so there's our group. I'm the one tall white guy there, with the white hair, the grandfather of the group. But it's an unbelievable diversity of just ways of thinking and experience that we're able to bring together. It's an amazing process, to be honest. But it breaks it down into 3 real core elements. One of it is starting from the intrapersonal cultural awareness that each of us brings a culture with us, and it's there whether we talk about it or not. So deep understanding of that, then moving into understanding the interpersonal cultural relationships and how who you are and who you're interacting with actually dramatically impacts the nature of the relationship. And then how do you take that and move first into culture-aware mentoring and then ultimately culturally responsive mentoring? So this is what we walk through over a period of about 6 pretty intensive hours. So these, again, for those who really would love to get into this, it's a fascinating process, which again, I'd be happy to talk with more people either in the Q&A or in the reception later. Okay, so now I want to, in the last 5 minutes or so, kind of talk about, again, moving from mentoring into coaching. And here, this is where, if you look at mentoring as a system, which is, and I purposely have chosen, coaching to complicate the discussion. It creates dissonance. What do you mean by a coach? Who's a coach? Who's not a coach? So that's on purpose, which I take the term. And it really means as much different things to different people, and I'll kind of define my use of it in a minute. But it really began, I've been thinking about this stuff, as you can probably guess, a long time, but I began to realize that mentoring as a system is incredibly idiosyncratic and incredibly based on luck, and randomness of where you happen to land many times and who are the people around to mentoring you. Because no two relationships are alike, which is great, but no two relationships are alike, can be awful. And so we're asked the question is, are there things that we could layer into and add to mentoring to kind of make the system work a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently? Again, so, and if we're trying to improve it, I mean, I've been in the business a long time, and I don't think I've ever heard a time where people say, oh, we need better mentors. Well, after you've heard this for 40 years, you begin to ask the question, maybe it's a system issue. Maybe it's a design issue, so maybe we ought to look at the design of our systems for developing talent, and that's what I've done. And so we've turned on this idea of systematic add-ons to complement mentoring. So when I use the word coaching, these are the elements that I bring into it. And again, acknowledging that everyone will use this differently, but it really starts from successful people in the field and actually usually respected and skilled mentors. So they've got some of the basic tools. These individuals, there is, like in research relationship, there is no quid pro quo relationship, and there is no element of evaluative role. So basically, as you get to, I'm a coach at Northwestern. I have no relationship or research. I have no I've got this great associate dean. I've got no authority and no responsibility. I just get to help people. It's the golden job, that I've kind of somehow created, which I literally have created. And it moves away from even the idea of dyadic in terms of I've moved into really group processes. Ask the question, could group processes actually work as well or better? And we found they actually do. And it can move into different roles. But again, it's not designed to replace particularly research mentors, it's to add to them. So I just give you two brief kind of examples of it. So one of which is the career coaching. And this is, as Lakshmi alluded to, I had this once-in-a-lifetime chance. Anybody remember the economic stimulus package? Way back when, back when the economy was in the tank? Well, one of the last things that came out for NIH is literally they call the NIH Director's Pathfinder Award for Diversity in the biomedical science. It basically said, if you had $2 million to do increased diversity, what would you do? Well, as a scientist, in this business, if you're successful, you develop what's called pathological grant-seeking behavior, okay? If there's money on the table, you cannot help yourself. You have to go after it. So I thought, hey, plus the application was 6 pages with no specific aims page. No structure at all. So I was in hog heaven, at this point. So we actually proposed this idea of adding a coaching process onto additional what people are getting their individual mentoring. And again, I could talk for hours on this one, but it was the idea that you bring students together from across the United States and give them a coach. And then you develop these processes, over in-person, and then extended version. And, again, we've got papers on this. We've got 3 or 4 more we're writing at the same time. But the bottom line when you see this is that the impacts range from not really, I got everything I need, to basically, if it hadn't been for my coaching group, I would have dropped out of the PhD. Literally, we can hear that. So it's never, you can't predict everyone's going to have that, but it presents a kind of a backdrop of a kind of a combination of safety net and deploying all this stuff you ought to know, but nobody ever teaches you. So that's, and then the variation of that, we took, not everyone's going to give you $2 million every day. So the affordable version is what Lakshmi has been part of through the ASPET, American Society of Pharmacology Experimental Therapeutic. You move that into the context of professional society. Okay, so in the last couple of minutes, like I mentioned at Northwestern, I've taken this approach to coaching to complement mentoring and moved it into my day job. So I've created a very systematic process of it's a group-based grant writing process. So I've done workshops and people say this is great. Now I know what I don't know how to do. Now what do I do? And I got tired of having to say no, so we moved this into a grant writing process. So literally, next week I'll be starting 3 grant writing groups. We subdivide them between basic science, clinical, and social behavioral. I've got this kind of odd background. I can relate to most of them. And over a period of 2 to 4 months, every week we will meet as we literally walk through a creation of each of the pieces of NIH or other style proposals. And in that time, and we've also developed stylized tools to actually deconstruct the rhetorical patterns of these writings and how you make them visible. And so in that process, I am a coach, but the group process is so much stronger than anything I can do as an individual. And the learning that takes place, the vicarious learning and the practice. So those who are into real teaching and learning, if we could talk about this, deconstruct this into a teaching and learning paradigm, it's fabulous. And we figured out, it goes so fast, there's no way you can take notes. So, what we do is I literally, we're recording it. So we can engage 100% in this process, and after half an hour on your Ames page, okay, I'll send you the file. And then all of a sudden, when you start to sit down and revise, you've got the entire, everything that has taken place during that process. So again, we work on significance, aims and innovation and training plans, but we don't try to get down in the weeds. So again, coaching to complement the mentoring. So then just briefly something to watch for, one more slide. The National Academy has actually had a series of about 3 panels based on training and what have you. One of the things that they came up with is that the recommendation that graduate students to learn and demonstrate evidence-based and inclusive teaching and mentoring practice, that faculty should be able to do that. So the next stage of that is a new National Academy panel, which I'm very privileged to be on. We're literally capturing the knowledge, the current knowledge base of the science of mentoring in science, technology, engineering, medicine, and math. So this study protocol will be coming out in about a year. It's been fascinating to really say, what do we know? What is research-based? And pulling it together is going to be very fabulous. All right, so obviously none of this any of us do by ourselves. I had an unbelievably great team of people through all these processes. And again, need to acknowledge our great benefactor in the sky in terms of the kind of supports we've had for doing it. Okay, so hopefully there's a little something for many of you in terms of snippets you might like to know more about, and I will stop there and turn it over to my next colleague. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that very interesting presentation. Next, I'm just introducing Dr. Jonathan Ripp, who is our new Senior Associate Dean for Wellbeing and Resilience and Chief Wellness Officer at the Icahn School of Medicine. And as I think you all are aware, he oversees efforts to provide direction for system and individual level interventions designed to improve well-being for students, residents, faculty, and fellows here in our system. So he's going to introduce our next speaker.
Pleasure to be here. That was a really great first talk, and I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, and also to be up here in the role that I'm in, and to have the opportunity to showcase the importance of well-being, the importance of our office, which has just been up for about a little over 6 months, but we already have sort of crafted our mission, which centers around our belief that your professional fulfillment is essential to delivering the best education, research, and patient care that we have to offer here at Mount Sinai. So investing in our most valuable resources and your well-being to get the job done. And so as Dr. Howell said, we're trying to do this by identifying drivers of well-being and burnout, measuring their influence, sharing and developing resources as they become available and those that already exist, the resources that have the potential to improve well-being, and of course ensuring the adequacy of mental health resources for all of our students, trainees, and faculty whenever they're in distress. So you should also know, several of you in the room probably already do know this, that we have, in addition to a number of associate deans for each of the constituent groups, students and graduate students, medical students, physicians in training, and faculty. We also have wellness champions, a growing cohort of faculty within departments that are tackling the issues most pertinent to well-being at the local level. So you'll be hearing lots more from us. We're just getting underway, but already it's really a pleasure to be up here and partnering with the Office of Academic Development and Enrichment. And so now on to our next speaker, It's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carol Bernstein. Dr. Bernstein is professor of psychiatry and neurology at the NYU School of Medicine, where she has either at one time or continues to hold a number of leadership positions. She has been the director of residency training and vice chair of education in the Department of Psychiatry, associate dean for graduate medical education, and the DIO, designated institutional official for ACGM accredited training programs. Dr. Bernstein completed medical school at Columbia University. She spent a year at St. Luke's Roosevelt doing an internship in internal medicine before returning to Columbia for her psychiatry residency training. And over the course of her illustrious career, she's had significant national presence, not the least of which is that she's the past president of the American Psychiatric Association. And for much of her career, she has been devoted to the education and training of the next generation of psychiatrists. Recognized for this skill and leadership, she has served for many years on the board of directors for the ACGME, which probably most of you know is the body that accredits more than 8,000 residency and fellowship training programs in the country. From 2016 to 2018, she co-chaired the ACGME Task Force on Physician Wellbeing, and she's presently a member of the National Academy of Medicine's Action Collaborative for Clinician Wellbeing and Resilience. Dr. Bernstein has been the recipient of numerous awards. She's written an abundance of articles and chapters on psychiatry education, served as a peer reviewer and on the editorial board of several journals, has been the recipient of many visiting professorships, and since 2009, she's also hosted a weekly call-in show on Sirius Radio, a doctor's radio channel, for which she's received special presidential commendation from the APA for her work helping to educate the public about mental illness. And beyond all that, on a personal note, she's really been an inspiration to me in the work that she's done to helping me look forward for what we can do here at Mount Sinai. So, Dr. Bernstein, it's a pleasure.
There's been a little bit of false advertising, I would say. You know, I'm supposed to be talking about work-life balance, but I'm actually going to depress you a little bit and talk about stress, burnout, and depression. But they're very essential. They're a very essential part of work-life balance, and I think we have to look at this in the medical culture moving forward. So I will try to do it. I have way too many slides, so I'm going to do it very quickly, so there's plenty of time to talk, but it's really a privilege to be here. It's great to meet Richard, and of course, John and I have developed a partnership already that we hope to really continue. That's me, this is important just for everybody to know. Obviously, if we take better care of ourselves, we're going to take better care of our patients. And I think we're going to take better care of our families too. And that's where the work-life balance or work-life integration piece comes into this. So I just, as part of the story, I like to tell a little bit of my own story. And I got involved in this, even though I've been in education and training my whole career, when the first publicized, because I don't want to say they were the first suicides. The first publicized suicides happened in New York in 2014. Many of you in the room, I'm sure, knew about them. And I was involved with the ACGME at that time. And that was where the initiative got launched. At our discussion at the board of directors, I happened to be the only psychiatrist in the room, and I kept thinking, oh my goodness, if we could get the medical culture to look this way, they will do a better job of looking that way at our patients. So that was sort of the beginning of the story for me, and as I was saying to John earlier, and also to Michael Lightman, it's really been a journey, and it's changed, and my understanding of what we need to do has changed as well. Really, suicide is just the tip of the iceberg, so I'm just going to note that for everybody in the room, and we can talk about that later. This is not a new problem in medicine. At least in 2003, the AMA issued a consensus statement on the importance of clinician well-being and concluded that the culture of medicine accords low priority to physician mental health, and we can say clinician as well as physician, despite the evidence of untreated mood disorders and suicide. They identified barriers, they recommended transforming attitudes and changing policies, and nothing happened. But I think we're at a different point in time, and we can talk about not only this being the tip of the iceberg, but a tipping point for all of us. This was, for, I don't know if any of you had ever seen this, this was on a bus station right outside of Bellevue a year and a half ago. My residents brought it to my attention and said, you're talking to us about well-being, and what does this say? It says, born to stay strong, time to help my patients, no time to be tired, see how we can help, a tiny little print from the AMA. So I called the AMA and I said, what are you doing? I mean, this is really sort of the wrong message, it's sort of like backwards. They were a little bit horrified, but I credit the residents for bringing it to my attention. This is the kind of thing that happens at work to all of us, where this was a picture of an emergency room doctor after he had lost a patient. These are some of the things that we don't talk about that I hope as we change the culture we can begin to discuss so that we can have better balance in our lives. These are the standard definitions of burnout that John and the group here at Mount Sinai will tell you more about. And the drivers, what are the drivers? Now, I do want to say that burnout is a little bit different because burnout really is the response of an individual to a system. And some of the drivers that we've identified are excess stress, mediated by long hours, fatigue, and work compression, as well as the intensity of the work environment, the loss of meaning and connection in medicine and patient care, decreased support, increased responsibility without autonomy and flexibility, challenges in institutional cultures, and of course, problems with work-life balance. And I actually prefer the term work-life integration because there really isn't any such thing as a balance. We're part of our lives are composed of our work lives and our personal lives, and we really have to understand how we can better integrate them. This, I think, is a really important slide. It's one of my favorites. It's 100 years old by Yerkes-Dodson. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And what it's talking about is the relationship between performance and level of stress. And I was talking with Dr. Charney about this a little while ago. He's done a lot of work on resilience, stamina, and grit. And what's important is that obviously there's some need to push the envelope, as it were. The analogy I like to make is that we all go to the gym to build our muscles, right? We want to do that. We want to be healthy. We want to be strong. So there is a certain amount of, if you will, stress or something we want to call that helps us. I mean, you don't get to build muscles or be a great tennis player or do other kinds of sports unless you practice and undergo some stress. But what we want to do is we want to push people up to optimal performance without tanking them and pushing them over the other side. These are just general risk factors for burnout and distress. They're not new to anybody, I think, sitting in this room, but I just thought I'd throw them up there. The impact of burnout on quality of care, there's a lot in the literature about it increasing surgical errors, medication errors, leading to increased infection and problems with mortality rate. This came out of work that was done by Stanford, so it's just something to keep in mind. There are many factors that contribute to burnout. Quality, cost, the patient experience, the loss of control over work, which I think is a big challenge for people when we're thinking about work-life balance, inefficiencies in the practice environment, which we can talk more about later, the increased complexity of medical care. John mentioned that I started at Mount Sinai North, St. Luke's, which is what it was called when I went. And, when I was an intern, yes, I worked 1 million hours, and I was in the hospital way too much. But when I left, nobody could find me. Nobody had devices. I mean, we had pagers, but we kind of left them in the hospital. And the complex patients died. We didn't have the armamentarium that we do in medicine now. So increased complexity of care is really important. And the EHR is a subject in and of itself that I won't talk about. This is just a graph that shows you that between 2011 and 2014, satisfaction with work-life balance sort of went up slightly for the general population and went down for physicians, and that burnout kind of remained stable in the general population, but went up for physicians. This was work by Shannenfeld et al. They've done a lot of work at Mayo in this area. This is just a fun slide for the clinicians in the room that looks at other studies by Shannenfeld and his crew at, where are the big pain groups in medicine. But I do want to point something out to you. This you always have to pay attention to the details. And the percent burned out over there starts at 35%. That's not zero. It starts at 35. And satisfaction with work-life balance starts at 15. So it's a little bit of a skewed data slide. But you can see that in the red area are general internal medicine, orthopedic surgery, family medicine, neurology. The neurologists have been sort of all over this. Urologic surgery, ENT. Yes, psychiatry, where I come from, is up there in the green, but you might be surprised to see that dermatology is in the orange. So some of this has to do with expectation and specialty choice, and that's, again, for another discussion. This just generally shows burnout at career stage, which means that it tends to increase to mid-career and then start to taper off a bit. But the slide on the bottom actually shows the differences in burnout between private practice academic medicine and the VA. And because all of us in this room are in academic medicine, I thought we'd be the worst, but in fact, it's not true. It's the gold bar, which is the folks in private practice. And that probably speaks to a large degree of isolation, even though they have much more control over what they do. There are also gender discrepancies in suicide rates. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the fact that the suicide ratio for women is higher than for men. This is across a lifetime, though, and I have another slide about that. What I want to talk about, just to mention about physician suicide versus the general population, is that there are features that are different. Physicians are less likely to have had the recent death of a friend or a family member, more likely to have had a job problem. They have higher measurable levels of benzos and barbiturates in their systems. Why? Because we're constantly treating ourselves. They tend to be older. They have a presence of a known mental illness, which relates to the last one, which is major barriers to help seeking diagnosis and treatment due to stigma. This is the only study that I've been able to find in the literature. We all know that suicide rates are going up in this country. It's obviously an unusual sample. It's just white men, and it was done in 2008. But what I want to call your attention to, even though what we've seen in New York lately, both here and tragically at my own institution, is that in fact, it's only as physicians get older, at least according to this, that the rates of suicide exceed the rates of the general population. So the red bar are the physicians, and at the younger ages, it's lower. Now, it's tragic. It's really tragic to lose young people to suicide, whether they're physicians or not. So that's really started to focus us on what the problem is. This is just a list of the criteria for depression. Again, these are baseline stressors for people going into medicine. Underlying medical and mental health issues, relationship challenges, family problems, financial stressors, the debt burden, the psychological makeup of physicians, the maladaptive perfectionism, and imposter syndrome. And I think that this also interfaces with work life in that a lot of people think they not only have to be perfect at work, they have to be perfect at home, taking care of their families as well. Academic health centers, stress faculty and staff, with RVUs, work compression, fractured care, decreasing length of stay, all of these things that I think you're all familiar with. There are barriers to treatment. This was one study that was done that appeared in JGME in 2010. And the reasons that people don't get treatment have to do with lack of time, preference for self-management, lack of access, which I know John is going to work on here, concerns about confidentiality, which is also part of the discussion, concerns about stigma, cost, and still many people don't think that the treatments work, although they do. So what is resilience? And you have a dean here who's very invested in this area. The capacity to bounce back, to withstand hardship, and to repair yourself. Positive adaptation in the face of stress or disruptive change. And it's based on a combination of factors, your genetics, I kind of think there's a resilience gene, external, what you see, what gets modeled, whether you've experienced trauma, and skills, problem solving, finding meaning and purpose, which I'm sure is part of what you're going to try to do here at Mount Sinai and at other institutions to really promote wellness. This is just sort of another nice slide that talks about the resilient health professional and what's needed here. Can we build this? So, of course, the first thing we have to do is that we have to understand that this is important. Exercise, sleep, and nutrition are critical, and it's a real challenge for all of us these days. Supportive professional relationships are important, talking things out with others. I heard earlier today about how powerful it was when Dr. Charney talked about his own experience when he had been shot with a group of residents and medical students. So I think that the older folks in the room, if we can talk more openly and candidly about the struggles that we face, and maybe this is part of the mentorship piece as well, sharing that is really important. Having good personal relationships is important. Boundaries between work and home. Sense of humor really makes a difference. The House of God came out when I was an intern, and let me tell you, it was helpful. Time away from work is obviously important, and passion's important. If you're passionate about what you're doing, it can do a lot to combat some of the stresses that we feel. So what should we do? I think this is a lot of what is going to has been starting to happen here. Having a chief wellness officer is important, but these are a lot of ways that you can consider to increase awareness about how to build resilience. We've already heard about wellness champions in departments, staff psychiatrists who are knowledgeable about depression and suicide, I think, are very important. Designating time for reflection is really helpful if we only had it. And I think that's a big challenge for academic health centers and for all of us, particularly if we want to get home and be with our families. When are we going to do this? That's a big problem. And in all of the strategic planning retreats that I've been on, people take little dots and they say, these are the 3 top things that we should be focusing on. Well, I think one of the things we need to do is find the 3 things that we can take out of our day so that we can have more time to do these other things, because none of this will happen if we can't take some of the things out of our day that we're doing already. And obviously some of these practical skills are important, but I think building community is really essential. One of the, and I think even in the context of patient care, if we can figure out ways to support each other, to make sure that patients get taken care of when we need to be at home and with our families, when important issues come up, when people get sick, when there's a loved one who's ailing and someone needs to go home, we need to think about this. We've already heard from Richard about coaching programs. I said I never heard of how to do this, particularly in clinical medicine. I think it's been much more, mentoring and coaching has been much more a part of the research community in a structured way than it's been for those of us in clinical medicine. And, of course, social events and shared community resources like childcare can be really helpful, and team building activities. All of these are important, but they have to be embedded if we're going to have time to be able to go home. Obviously, ensuring access to care is important, which I know that John and the group here are working on. One size doesn't fit all, but self-care is not in conflict with altruism. You all know about this when you get on an airplane. So it is important, but we have to figure out how to balance things. These are just some examples of programs that I don't really have time to go into, but you have heard some, at least a little bit, about coaching. So what are our next steps? Well, I was telling John that we like to think about this as a public health problem, and that primary prevention is really important. Education and awareness, which is what some of this is, skill building and stress mitigation, time management, sleep hygiene. And again, I think good mentoring and good coaching can help with this. Learning environment interventions that facilitate culture change, work-life balance, and emphasizing meaning, concrete support such as childcare and family support, and PCP availability, primary care availability for everybody. That's really important. Then there's secondary recognition, which is kind of trying to figure out who's at risk, who's in trouble, who needs help. And I think there's a lot of peer work that can happen here, as well as anonymous screening. And the tertiary intervention piece really has to do with treatment for people who need treatment in the depression realm. But again, that's a little bit different than looking at burnout on the systems level. So again, there are individually focused solutions for the individual. And then we need to look at the organization. How do we create culture change with leadership, physician engagement, community building, stress reduction, enhancing meaning, protecting time with patients, I think is critical for all of us. And again, work-life balance. What does team-based care really mean? How can we use that? How can we support each other? And again, down there at the bottom, which was never on these slides, has to do with time. Where do we find that? It's a shared responsibility. We need a culture of wellness, efficiency of practice, professional fulfillment, personal resilience, organizational responsibility. This is all coming out of Stanford. And this will enable us to have better integration with our work lives and our home lives. This is just another way to look at it. Sort of there's that tree of life in the middle, talking about the left is, your individual identity, and I think Richard also mentioned, I was very intrigued by your cultural inclusion in the mentoring, but this is all part of what happens with work-life integration. And then there's the professional side, professional identity, professional community, and the medical culture. This is one of my favorite slides, organizational culture, each strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So no matter what we do strategically to have plans, if it's not consonant with the culture, nothing will really happen. And I think that that's a very, very important message. I like to think of us in a socio-political reality, which is sort of the external square here. We're living in a culture that's undergoing a lot of radical disruption at the moment. I think that affects all of us, and it impacts on all of these things, the personal factors, the work environment, and the learning and educational environment. And these are just some ways to look at the challenges in those specific areas in the work environment, and the opportunities are obviously the parallel side. Administrative and regulatory burdens, decreased time with patients, the EHR, productivity, staffing shortages, work compression, and the opportunities you can see for yourself there. And it sounds to me from what I've heard today that some of this is happening at Mount Sinai, and I think that that's really terrific. And again, in the learning and educational environment, which is the space that I've been in, the loss of humanism in medicine, power differentials and mistreatment, increased complexity of patients, inadequate faculty time for teaching. That's been a big bugaboo, I think, in a lot of academic centers because there's so much pressure for people to produce that they don't have time to do that. And of course, the debt burden, and there are a lot of opportunities in that arena too. And then there are personal factors, and these are individual, biopsychosocial vulnerability, stressful life events, exposure to trauma, isolation, stigma, licensure and credentialing concerns, and the debt burden. And, we need opportunities to be able to address those. So I even got Jonathan on this slide. One of the solutions here is having chief wellness officers in the C-suite. Tate Shannonfeld was the first. John, I don't know if you were the second, but you're certainly one of the early adopters here. And, we're still in the process of defining what all of this was. And I was picking John's brain earlier about what you're doing here. And again, it sounds very exciting. But at least to get this up to the C-suite and have leadership invested in it is critically important. This is something that came up on stat.com over the summer, at least to me. It was new territory. It's the moral injury analogy. Some propose the use of moral injury to address what's going on in medicine. This was historically on the battlefield, soldiers' response to actions in war that pierce identity, morality, and their relationship to society. Physicians enter medicine as a calling. It's almost religious zeal. They put up with lost sleep, lost years of young adulthood, financial and family strain, disregard for personal health. I mean, obviously, we're going to try to address that. And I don't think that this has changed a whit, no matter what anybody says about generational differences. We do enter medicine as a calling, all of us, even kids now. But being able to provide high-quality care and healing in the context of healthcare can create this moral injury analogy to the Hippocratic Oath. We're inundated with patient satisfaction, provider ratings, review sites, making a profit from people who are at their sickest and most vulnerable, and routinely being unable to deliver the kind of care that patients need. Physicians become wounded, disengaged, and hopeless. And I think that this is a really apt analogy and something we need to think about. And having leadership, at least, that's willing to acknowledge what's going on for all of us would be very helpful, and having the courage to confront and minimize the competing demands. We can't make them go away, but we can talk about them. And leaders who recognize that caring for physicians, say healthcare providers across the board, results in compassionate care for patients. There's also a business case that's been advanced about how much it costs, if you look at retention, how much it costs to replace people, and that's an argument that the C-suite ought to listen to. Of course, you've already heard mention of the Action Collaborative on Clinician Wellbeing and Resilience. This is just the leading team, and I would say having the National Academy of Medicine interested and concerned about this is huge. I mean, they're dealing with things at a mega level that John and I both know, but the fact that they're taking it on is really important. Somebody has to do something. It's just incredibly pathetic that it has to be us. That was Jerry Garcia. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. I think we are at a fork in the road. I think we can do better going forward for all of us. And I do want to thank a lot of other people for helping me with this presentation. So thank you, and I think now we have time for questions.
I think the first question I have, I was going to ask Dr. McGee to talk a little bit more about this cultural inclusion and some of the lessons that you've learned and how, to expand on that a little bit more for us.
Sure. You can be careful what you ask for. Ooh, that's loud. Okay. I'll move back a little bit. No, it's actually been a fascinating process of how you can set up a space where people can talk about it and kind of prime the space. And so the way we actually have an online module that, it's a lot of it is actually giving people definitions and kind of language. So for example, the initial online module talks about, well, where has essentially it come from in our country, where the current state, but then defining things such as stereotype threat, and define like microaggressions and giving language to the experiences of people who are different by many different categories, essentially within the professional space and within mentoring relationships. And then, as I mentioned others, it starts out that everyone, before you come to the workshop, everyone has to create a culture box. And in this culture box, you actually bring 3 physical objects as much as possible of who you are and your culture and how you identify your social selves. And one of those needs to be about your racial or ethnic identity and culture. And when they start out, one of the first activities is that break up in groups of 6, and each person takes turn. They bring out their culture box. Many times these are physical boxes, literally, or virtual boxes, and they talk through what they brought and what it means to them and why. It opens up conversations like literally I have never seen, and I've been in the business a long time, because it's giving a permission to talk about, you don't have to bring something you don't want to talk about. But yet it gives them permission though to talk about who they are, and then it leads into other conversations through the rest of the day. And through the rest of the day, it's designed to be these activity-based, and combinations, and then actually moving to say, okay, now how do you actually practice this? So with role plays, how do you actually, okay, here's a scenario who is coming from a very different cultural background. How do you interact and engage in a mentoring practice relationship? So moving through these series of things, but it creates a space where it's okay to ask, wow, what's it like to be? And talk about this, and it's almost like it gives these permission for these conversations, but it's in essentially a protected space. So this is how it works, and so what we're following, does it make a difference? And so we're actually doing follow-up interviews with people after they've been through this. Pretty dramatic changes. We're finding some examples. I mean, you never find, but people even saying, I realize I'm looking at my students and I realize they're really different, but I really don't know them. I really don't know what their lives are like. But, came up earlier where you mentioned about sharing yourself. That actually becomes one of the key tools that we encourage people to do. Just be a little bit more open about sharing yourself with other people. And that alone turns out to be an incredibly powerful piece that many people are almost kind of trained, well, you don't do that in mentoring. Well, why not? And so it's a little bit of myth busting, as well from the standpoint. So again, and it's actually, you create a cadre of people at locations that now can kind of begin thinking about doing this. So it's actually been really quite dramatic. But as we all began, we vowed we would not create another diversity training. We all agreed if we saw one more of these, somebody was going to get hurt. And so we vowed this would not be us. And so we've moved into this, really more of a very different kind of, and we had no idea where we were going when we got started, I'll be real honest. We had these 8 of us, and, well, we got to create something. What will it look like? So it's actually an amazing process, and the first paper we've written actually talks about that process.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. I think I'm going to sit down right here. Sorry, I just realized there's a chair for me. I think so much prefer this. Dr. Bernstein, do you want to talk a little bit about your thinking? I guess I'm not on. I'm on now. You know, compelling, a lot of really compelling statistics. I guess the first thing I was just going to talk to you a little bit about is your framing of work-life integration versus balance, and if you could expand on that a bit for us.
Well, this is sort of my own version, because it's not I didn't study it yet. I can't do that. I keep making apologies for not being a researcher and sort of going with my heart. But the reality is that given the way technology works now, as wonderful as it is, and many of us have spent time, I'm working from home today. I mean, how many times have we? Lots. I mean, other than actually seeing patients, there's a lot that we can do that we can work from home. The problem is that you're home and and other things distract you, and they take you away from what you're doing at work. And if you have small children, as an example, that's particularly challenging. So I think that the term integration and what we have to focus on is more apt for that than to talk about balance. Also, my own experience has been that there isn't such a thing as balance. I mean, in the sense that if you're working and you have outside interests and friends and family, you're always juggling. And I think one of the challenges is that there's a fantasy out there that there is a balance. First of all, it's individual. So what works for me may not work for you or John or Richard. Those are all very different things. And that we have to be able to give a message to people that you have to figure out inside, and this is where the personal stories matter so much, how it works for you. I had a child, I didn't physically have her, but I had her very late in my career. It wasn't by choice, it was sort of what happened. Someone else may decide to have children early in a career. Someone else may say, I don't really want children at all. And I think all of those factors go into how we understand what work-life integration really means, and that it is going to be different culturally. It is going to be different with how people determine what their social environment is about, and that probably we would bring ourselves closer and do a better job if we could have at least even some space in work to say something about that. Unless we're in solo practice, most of us are working in some kind of community work situation. And maybe it would help us to take a page even from the mentoring, the cultural diversity work that Richard was talking about, to share a little about that. I don't mean to be, only, that the workplace becomes where everybody spills out and shares everything, but just to know a little bit. It humanizes people. And then if you have to take a day off because you're home with a sick child, and we have to pick up extra work with patients because you're not there, it feels different. And maybe then we can start, as we learn about each other, and I think a lot of the change that we can make has to happen very much at the very level that we work, whether it's in the NICU or the emergency room or in a lab, that the setting and the context and the people we work with, that's where it has to be shared, and that's where we have to really find what the solutions are, because they're not, what matters at the mega level is the climate, but the climate is also determined by what happens very locally. So just some thoughts about that.
You want to just speak up very loudly, please, and then we'll. There's a mic. Oh, there's a mic. Thanks. And then maybe bring it with you, and then we can pass it around. That'd be perfect.
So I actually have a question for both of you regarding reluctant, let's say mentees, and also reluctant people who might be unwell, or who they might be at risk for being unwell, and and sort of how do you approach them? Because this is a very delicate thing, especially if someone who is perceived to be a superior or a leader in their department. And so I was wondering for both of you, for instance, is your mentoring program mandatory or is it voluntary? And then for Dr. Bernstein, how do you approach folks who you think might be at risk but for whom this is going to be a delicate conversation, and how do you work that?
I think from the mentoring perspective, you still have to have the desire. You know, the two different elements of it: the desire and the skills and how to do it. And what we tend to find out, and so like in terms of mandatory, the workshops and things that we do, we don't want anything to be mandatory. Because again, and yes, you miss some people, but the disruption that can be created in that process is typically not, especially if we're coming in from the outside to help facilitate these things. So it's more kind of enabling the people who are open, enabling who are, yeah, I'm curious, something I want to do, I have no idea how to do it. You know, and that's what we hear more than anything else, is that I'd be happy to do this, but I have no idea, you know, and I'm afraid of stepping on toes. And so you give them the skills of how you engage. Like, so sharing about yourself. If you've got a person and you'd love to kind of at least, you know, a little bit more openness, rather than saying, well, tell me about yourself. Now, okay, well, what do I say? You know, what does she want? What she's fishing for versus, you know, just getting, no, let me tell you a little bit about myself. The difference between those two directions is palpable from the standpoint of permission, you know, and kind of setting those stage. So those are the kind of some of those skills they bring in. But from a reluctance, you mean from the mentee or the mentor standpoint? From the mentee. Yeah, and that's, again, it's a matter of it depends on the level of kind of supervision and the level of control of life, you know, which it translates both across the research and the clinical setting in different ways. But typically, those are things ideally you can set them up so you aren't in that position. So you have tools like, for me, I'm not in charge of nobody, you know, so it's a perfect scenario from the standpoint, I'm as safe as it gets. You know, and I have such a lousy memory, I couldn't remember what you told me next week anyway, kind of a thing. But you're setting up those safe spaces, you know, from those perspectives as much as you can, or even a department level, if you have departmental mentoring, having someone mentoring who is also writing your tenure package ain't going to work too well, you know. And so you consciously set up people who are protected. So here's a senior person, I will choose not to be involved in any of these promotion decisions so I can play this role. So you actually isolate roles that people play so you can enable them to play those different aspects. So that can get away from some of the reluctance, you know, in some from a mentoring standpoint.
I wanted to clarify something. Were you talking about someone you were concerned about, or someone above you that you were concerned about, or both?
I was talking more about if there's somebody, let's say in your department, who you're concerned about, how do you do that, especially if there's a lack of self-awareness or whatever.
Right. So my answer to that, it's a little bit of a cliche, but it's if you see something, say something. So the way to approach it is, and it's kind of similar to what we're talking about with the mentorship or revealing self. So you could start the conversation by saying, I have noticed that, or it seems to me that, not you look unhappy, but it seems to me that you've looked unhappy, or it seems to me like something is wrong, and see where that gets you. I mean, you know, this comes up a lot. John referenced my radio show. It is a call-in show. It's part of this Dr. Radio channel that NYU has with SiriusXM. And a lot of the questions are, how do I get my relative into treatment when they don't want to go? Well, you can't ultimately force it, but you can express your own level of concern. And at some point, it's kind of like the reluctant mentee, too. You want to set it up as much as you can to make it open, which is why these kinds of conversations are important, because what we want to do is to help people feel more comfortable about acknowledging those things. And I believe certainly that if leadership acknowledges, or if people above you acknowledge, you know, I struggled, I was depressed when I was an intern at St. Luke's, and I was. No one treated me, you know, but that is what happened. So I decided to switch into psychiatry and treat myself. No, but I think it's important, you know, to for people to have conversations about tough times. And if we create an environment like that, it will make it easier for people. We're not going to get everybody, and people are going to struggle, and sometimes that results in, you know, so I don't want to promise that, but people are often afraid to say something, and it's really okay. And if you have a close friend, I'm just going to say this, if someone starts talking to you about suicide that you're close to, try to get them help. I mean, and talk about it. Don't not talk about it. We know that it's important that if people are saying those things, that those are significant, and we want to help them.
One of Dr. Bernstein's slides had a line that cited specifically, explicitly, humanism in medicine. And as a former Gold Foundation professor, I was wondering to what extent, if at all, any of your initiatives have established a relationship or an alliance with the Arnold P. Gold Foundation for humanism in medicine.
John wants to talk about the charter. The
No,
yeah.
I'm just, the Gold
Yeah.
Foundation funded a meeting that led to. The Gold Foundation funded a meeting that led to the writing of a charter on physician well-being, which Carol and others were involved in. It was in JAMA a few months back. So yeah,
So that-
amongst
that-
other things.
Yeah, and I assume you have gold humanism chapters here. Yes, yeah. So, yeah.
Humanism hasn't reached the biomedical PhD world yet, but we really are quite human, most of us. Yeah, but no, in tongue in cheek. But it's a very important element of it because it's about relationships and it's about the other person, and how you can be human and they can be human in terms of how you actually bring that into, as opposed to we just got to get aim number 2 done, kind of a thing. So it's absolutely, but it hasn't come up per se.
Other questions?
So this is a question for Richard. So can you tell us a little bit more about the coaching study that you did? What did you find there? Particularly things that perhaps we could apply to graduate student training and postdoctoral training. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And we're, so just a little bit more of a background. I guess one slide snippet up there. So this was literally, we recruited, it was 200 beginning biomedical PhD students just before they started the PhD, and literally they were randomly assigned to control or experimental. And then 120 advanced students, within a year or two of graduating, and brought them in. Again, half of them got nothing. It was a true RCT. But one of the things we did, interestingly, is we purposely stratified the coaching groups such that, so of the 100, beginning students, we had 25 white, 25 Asian, 25 black, and 25 Hispanic. And we purposely seeded each of the 10 groups. So you had 2 of each and a couple of other odd ones thrown in. So we purposely created this bizarre experience of people to kind of begin. And that turned out to be probably one of the smartest things we did, because it turned out that engaged conversation. So it was not seen as a diversity program. No, it's a humanistic program of we're all in this together. And that created a sense of people reacting and getting to know each other who are not like themselves in many ways. But then in the actual programmatic, we literally said, okay, taking the cultural capital perspective of becoming a successful scientist, what are those elements that everybody needs to have? And we built those in. And then the coaches were designed to, you had 1 coach per 10 students. They were engaged in this in person, and then they follow them virtually after that. And at the end of the day, what you find is that, like I said, it ranges in terms of what people take away from it, yet they rave about being part of it. But you can't always put your finger on exactly what it did for them. But yet they loved it. And some of them got like this. I mean, some of the groups were they're still bonded at the hips practically after we've done doing anything for them. But it varies completely from one stage to the other. So the beginning PhD students, their first 2 years, it's number 1, survival and finding, lab, and then it's qualifying exams, and then everyone goes off their way. For the other ones, more advanced, when they began to see really helping them make right decisions about postdocs, what came about is you had this independent person, and they could see this skilled, successful person as they have nothing in it other than what's best for me. And they're sharing this incredible acquired knowledge and skills they've had over the years. But it's a combination of the peers and the coach together. Everything we've been doing has been saying is this combination tends to be incredibly valuable from it's the peers, but it's also the sharing of this expansive knowledge that the expert in the field has. Which again, because when they're doing that, they're not doing anything else. They don't have any experiments going on. They're not writing a grant. They're completely dedicated for that point in time to this group. but they all would say incredibly valuable to have it outside of my institution. And incredibly valuable to have it kind of a more broad base. But one thing we found is that, but they also wanted to talk science, eventually as they got into it. So that's like with Lakshmi, we've situated other groups, say, within a scientific society. So now you can have the scientific identity along with the, the elements and having the coach. So is it worth the money? How do you describe that in terms of, we had literally people who said, I would have dropped out. I would have made the most awful decision at a postdoc I could have possibly made without my coach. So it's how do you quantify that, which has been difficult to, to put, a lot of, it's beyond, we see it, what frequency does it take to make it worthwhile? But we, again, we've learned a whole lot about how to make them, effective. But what's really fascinating, you think you're going to have a hard time getting people to talk together. Once you get them started, it's like, no, I mean, it's how do you get them to shut up kind of a thing. So come on, we got to meet. We got to know. We want to talk to each other. So it's fascinating how quickly you can actually stimulate. We've seen that in the ASPED groups. I mean, literally, these are people who have never seen each other before, and within an hour or two, they're completely talking, setting up the expectations and setting up the environment in such a way we've learned a lot of how to do that well. Be happy to talk with you more later if you want to, obviously.
Are there any other questions? Okay, because I have a number of questions, but we could go outside and have, everyone can join us in the reception area and we can, have a glass of wine and keep asking questions. Does that sound good?